Welcome to Issues That Matter. I'm Cynthia Poole. My guest today is,
Anthony Gronowicz.
thank you so much. And we're here to talk about politics. And in the couple of minutes before I press the record button, Tony seems to be pretty well versed in politics and the history of politics. So let's start now.
In the U.S.
In the United States. So as of right now, Tony, what do you think of the presidential election?
Well, I think it's a choice between two evils.
Okay. And why do you say that?
Well, because Biden is he can't even walk, he can't even talk.
Mm-hmm.
He's no leader. I mean, this is incredible what we're faced. And Trump, of course, is a demagogue of the worst sort. I mean, I did a book on race and class politics in New York City before the Civil War, 90, back when Toni Morrison was calling Bill Clinton the first Black president.
Right, I remember that.
Yeah, so it shows where people's heads are at, including in the ivory towers and the lesser towers, the wooden towers.
But I think people today are becoming more and more, I don't want to use the word brainwashed, but I will. Listening to the mainstream media, they seem to have they buy into it. They don't think for themselves, and I think it's disastrous for the not only this country but the entire world. What do you think?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. I think that, and it's not so much that they were brainwashed back in the day, but there was no alternate media. I always say to the students, thank God for the internet.
Mm-hmm.
Have a basis of knowledge. You can find anything you want on the internet, research wise, lives and everything. And you can do your own research, which most people are not in a position to do that because they're depressed. They're working too hard.
Right. And that's by design.
That's by design, yes.
Yes.
And the material conditions of I would say the majority of Americans has gotten worse in this millennium, especially after the Great Recession, from which we have never recovered. And then on top of that was the election of Donald Trump, who, for all that's been said about him, did not get us into any wars.
Right.
Very important.
I totally agree.
The Iraq War was a disaster for the Iraqis, for the Americans, and for the living conditions. Inflation. That's when the national debt doubled from $5.5 trillion to 11 trillion under Bush. And that's the only reason, that's the main reason why Obama got in, because to calm things, to cool things. And of course, I don't think he did a good job. He got NATO to bomb in Libya. He even admits that it was his mistake. So in 2011, so it's cumulative. It's absolutely cumulative, and material conditions. The inflation that began before the Ukraine invasion was the largest in 41 years. 41 years, and now if you look at and the previous time the inflation went so high, at the beginning of Reagan's administration, there was hardly national debt. National debt on the scale of trillions only began under Carter, because the United States was riding high still off the Second World War. And if you spend half your military budget, half your budget on the military, I don't know, decade after decade after decade, because you believe that one of the main aims of the United States is to govern the globe. And here I'm quoting from Adams' letter to Jefferson in 1813, the head of the Federalist Party, the head of the Democratic Republican Party. If the aim of the United States is to govern the globe, and the leaders are pursuing that, it leads to bankruptcy. But there's no political party which challenges that effectively. Both parties are complicit.
Right. Now, you're green, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And you live in New York State.
New York City.
New York City. The threshold to run for office for the Greens or any other third-party candidate was made almost insurmountable by Andrew Cuomo. So as a third party, as a Green, I think this is kind of disillusioning. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely.
Mhm.
Now, he was a punk in the sense of how he regarded third parties.
Mhm.
And, and of course, he wasn't honest. And of course, he was he resigned from office. And that was his legacy, other than a disastrous handling of COVID in New York State,
Mhm. Mm.
dumping, the hospital patients into nursing homes, where my daughter worked, and she got COVID she got compensation, but she got COVID as a result of that.
Mm.
So, I mean, what? I'm sorry.
Go ahead. It's not. I cut you off. Go ahead.
So, yeah, 45,000 votes to run for governor, and that's unique to any state in the union, is a disaster.
Right.
For a small party who blew it back in 2004 when it did not renominate Nader to be on its ticket. And Nader back then was appealing to both parties, the Democrat and Republican. He could have established the Greens as a permanent president, but he was sabotaged in 2004.
In 2004, who ran for president on the Green Party line?
David Cobb.
Oh, okay. What percentage of the vote did he get?
0.10.
Oh boy! Wow.
And worse than that, his vice presidential candidate, Pat LaMarche, said, "I'm not saying the K word, but I think you should vote for K in the unsafe states. Is this safe to have a third party candidate?" Accepting the notion or the myth that Green Party cost the election in 2000.
Right.
When there were 8 third parties running in Florida. And the president's brother was the governor.
Right, exactly.
Sabotage the black voters. And I can, you can write a book on this. And actually, Robert F. Kennedy wrote a long article in Rolling Stone.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody did the research demonstrating how there were so many unique aspects to the 2004 election, which led to Bush's election.
Re-election.
Well, I'm talking about, yeah. Well, the 2000 election was also unique.
Okay.
Because you have the Supreme Court decision, Bush versus Gore.
Right.
Where Scalia, where they rule 5-4 to stop the vote counting.
Mm-hmm.
When Gore was only 500 votes behind Gore in Florida, which would have made the difference, and Gore would have become president, but he chose not to challenge it. Mm-hmm. And any Democratic senator could have challenged it in 2000, and therefore Bush became president, and we saw what came. doubling of the national debt, and a horrible war in Iraq that only was successful because even though the French and the Germans supported it, the Russians weren't involved.
Mm-hmm.
That's the difference.
So I assume that you've been a Green for a while.
Yeah, I joined in 1996 when Ralph Nader first ran for president.
Okay, so
Green.
You've seen the Green Party evolve over the years.
Absolutely.
Given the fact that the two parties are not addressing the important issues, why hasn't the Greens caught fire and really challenged the two major parties?
Well, it was catching fire when Nader got almost 3% of the vote in 2000.
Okay.
And then it was sabotaged at the convention in 2004. And they came up with this guy, David Cobb, and Pat Marsh, who was supporting Kerry at the end as his vice presidential candidate and saying it openly.
Okay, so who sabotaged your party?
You can people who wanted to see the Green Party fail.
And then, over the years, I know the Green Party from maybe 8 years ago, and Howie Hawkins hasn't caught fire. I mean, he ran for governor a couple of times, and he ran for president, and he keeps talking about organizing, but I don't see many Greens elected to any level of government. What's going to take for people to realize that the two-party system is failing them and they have to look for an alternative?
I think of more misery. More misery. I mean, when I ran for mayor of New York City in 2005 and 2013, well, in 2013, certainly, I ran on the Green New Deal, which Howie came up with which AOC co-opted without giving proper referencing. The Green New Deal was Howie's point. Campaign slogan.
Right.
In the governor's race of 2010, I guess.
Right.
So she just took it, and she's a Democrat.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it. Okay, so when I ran on a platform of 10 to 30 seconds campaign speech, depending on how I'm feeling that day. And was, I believe, in a 5-fingered exercise. Full-time jobs with full benefits, free health care, in this terrible morass with health care now. We're the only advanced industrial country so far behind. Low-cost housing. Thousands of people in New York, tens of thousands, a couple of 100,000 are behind in their rent, facing eviction. Free education. Germany and Cuba, two disparate systems, have free education to the highest level. Whereas I teach at City University, it was free from 1847 to 1975, when it became majority Black and brown. And respect for the environment, as there was very little respect for environment. And incidentally, Nader pioneered in that, making the environment an issue back in 1970.
There is over 40 million Americans.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
There's over 40 million Americans who have student debt right now, who are burdened with it, And I think it's terrible. The student loan debt crisis is a really crippling thing for the people in this country. 40 million. That should be enough to sway an election, right?
Right, but you need a party to advocate for it and not hold it this carrot and then use a stick abroad like the Democrats and Republicans spend the money on that rather than full medical care for Americans.
So you think the student loan debt crisis needs somebody to run on their line to make a point?
Oh, absolutely. There's more student debt than credit card debt in this country.
Right. Right. So as of right now, what do you think? What do you think's going to happen in the general election of 2024?
Well, Svengali, I don't know. I'm going to rub my crystal ball here.
Uh-huh.
This is a really difficult question here. But if Trump is ahead of DeSantis right now, anything can change. I mean, Trump has charisma, whether you like it or not. He has charisma.
Right.
DeSantis has no charisma to speak of, frankly. And he has skeletons in his closet as well, which will come out if he gets the nomination. And Biden is can't finish his sentence, and he it's frightening. He just toasted the Queen.
Yes, I heard that.
Twice, not once, but
Oh
twice.
boy! Wow.
The same encounter. I don't know if you saw that at all.
I heard him say, "God save the Queen."
God save the Queen, exactly. So,
what was he thinking?
Well, he wasn't. His handlers didn't tell him maybe that burden his. I mean, this is it's funny, but it's not funny because this is the most powerful country in the world, still economically and certainly militarily.
Mm-hmm.
So we have weak presidents. When we had weak presidents in the 1850s before the Civil War. And certainly we are approaching a second Civil War. When I wrote my book on race and class politics in New York City before the Civil War, I was referring to the first Civil War, but I certainly knew that race had to be an issue or something had to be done about this. And we saw this with the George Floyd demonstrations. Now that we have cell phones, photographs, films can be taken, and 15 to 25 million people protested, mostly young, and it was integrated, 61% white, 39% black and brown. And it was never been such an outpouring of that kind of sentiment during the COVID crisis. So what's going to happen in 24? Well, now that Cornel West has put his hat in the ring,
Mm-hmm.
And he's got a lot of visibility, and RFK has put his hat in the ring in the Democratic primaries, it remains to be seen what's going to be happen. Anything can happen.
You mentioned two important people, West. Do you think he'll ultimately run for president on the Green Party line?
Yes.
Because I spoke to Mark Dunley. Do you know Mark?
Very well.
Mark thinks that ultimately Westville will back down and not run, and Howie Hawkins will run again for president.
That would be a disaster. That would be a disaster. Howie just doesn't have charisma. I mean, he's he believes in what he believes in. He's honest. But he just doesn't have what it takes. I mean, you look at RFK Jr. I saw his, for instance, RFK Jr. He is, I heard his presidential announcement in Boston.
Mm-hmm.
He's got a problem with his voice.
Mm-hmm.
It was 2 hours long. It was extraordinary. and he's a dyed-in-the-wool environmentalist.
Mhm.
So he's got that under his belt. And I mean, Dunley is honest, but he's not going to run for president. So if he thinks that's the case, then, you know, everyone's entitled to their crystal ball.
Mhm.
But RFK could get the green line also because of his solid environmental record.
Oh, right.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. Do you know if he's made it?
Riverkeepers, he was one of the founders of Riverkeepers on the Hudson River.
Right, right. And he was instrumental in to make sure that fracking did not happen in New York State, right?
That's correct.
Yep. So when you ran for mayor, who did you run? Who did you run against?
I ran against Bill de Blasio.
Oh, that must have been a joy.
Yeah, I mean, the few debates I was allowed, like on education down at the Mary Bergstrom High School, and with not Matt Gonzalez, the sidekick of Juan Gonzalez of
Mhm.
Democracy Now. I mean, they took a poll and I won the debate, but so what?
Mhm.
Didn't have the money. I mean, and earlier I ran against Bloomberg in 2005.
Oh, wow. That's like a real David and Goliath story, right?
Absolutely. He spent more money on his first election than any mayor in history, more money than himself in the second term. And by the third term that he got by promising Democratic doubters on the city council to give him a third term,
Mhm.
even more of a record. So he was the richest mayor in history. And don't forget, he tried to buy the Democratic Party nomination for president.
Right. How many delegates did he get? One or two?
Something like that.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
tough to do. Conditions have to get very bad. So the history tells me we may have a civil war. We have, I mean, the odds are even. I don't want to see this. That's why it's very important to have a nonviolent party like the Greens in the race.
So when you talk a civil war, are you talking the North against the South? Are you talking about blacks against whites? What specifically are you saying when you think there might be another civil war?
Well, certainly against the powers that be. I mean, they weren't, you know, what was going on in the streets on January 6th,
Mhm.
2021 was aimed at the notion that Biden's handlers had cheated, and with his vote of 81 million. But people forget that Trump vastly exceeded his vote. And women's rights advocates, not to put all the blame on the Green Party, the percentage of women who voted, 53% voted for Donald Trump in 2016, if you check the statistics.
Uh-huh.
And then in 2020, of women, white women, that is, I should say. And
Uh-huh.
it rose to 55% in 2020. And that, most people forget that. Most people don't even know that.
Right. And I'm sure that you have a lot of facts that people don't know that you could share, I believe.
Absolutely.
So
I just finished the 2 books in the last 2 years. Oh, actually, one in 21 and one in 22, both published. The first one was Last Western Empire, a history of U.S. foreign policy, which essentially deals with the 20th century. People forget that Democratic Party was the party that got us in the 4 major wars for the U.S. in the 20th century.
mhm.
World War I, World War II, Korea, and Vietnam, and a book on John Lennon's assassination, which came out in November of last year, called Careless John. Careless.
Can I get that on Barnes and Noble? That's a book that I'd like to look at.
Oh yeah, on Amazon.
Oh, okay. So what, like, I'm a baby boomer, so I kind of like the Beatles back then. What was your book on John Lennon about?
Well, I happened to live in a brownstone back in 1980, whose owner moved in with Yoko the night Lennon was killed. That's how the mystery began for me.
Say that again.
I'll say it slowly. So it's not a laughing matter. I lived in a brownstone.
Yes.
In 1980. And in this early December, when Lennon was killed, my landlord moved out and in with Yoko Ono.
Really?
Yes, that's how it starts. And his attorney, we tried to keep secret for a while, was the same attorney who got Jimi Hendrix's passport to go to London in 1966 for the first time.
Wow.
So connect the dots.
Wow.
But dots are hidden, and you have to actually. The second, I got it's all there. It's all published material. So, yeah, it's a short book because a lot of people have written books on John. Well, not a lot of people have written books on John Lennon, but nobody mentions this character. So he moved in with her. He was the interior decorator, whom Yoko introduced to John back in '78, I guess, when they walked into an antique store on, 70th and Lexington, and said, "John, I like those Egyptian revival chairs." And the person who sold him the chairs was Samuel Habitoy. And Habitoy then very shortly became her interior decorator.
Wow.
There you have it.
I'd like to do
Habitoy Incorporated. Leon Dicker, his lawyer, Brooklyn College Law School, incorporated his gallery. I found the business papers.
Wow.
9 days before Lennon made out his will and left everything to Yoko. Hence the controversy with Julian Lennon.
9 days before he died?
9 days before he died. No, 9 days before he made out his will.
Oh, okay. Okay.
It was a complicated assassination. One of the participants is on the cover of my book, which features John and Yoko, an actually, photograph taken of them standing in front of the Dakota 11 days before he was killed. And in the background is the doorman, Jose Padermo, who is an anti-Castro Cuban, who I believed fired the shots that killed Lennon. Mark David Chapman fired shots, but as the testimony shows that I present in the book, his own testimony, he said, if they had been walking together when they left the record plant and came back to the Dakota, she walked 40 feet ahead of him. Now, Chapman fired his gun, but if they'd been walking together as they did when they left for the record plant that night, he thought he wouldn't have been able to do it that night. And the next day, Ronald Reagan is in town. So it was great that Chapman, a Christian fundamentalist from the South, did it.
Wow.
Some of the details in there have never been published anywhere. But
I'd like to go further with this conversation, but that will be for another day. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of events that are going to take place where you and I can talk. Would that be okay?
absolutely.
Okay, great. So please help me with your name again. This is Issues That Matter. I'm Cynthia Pooler, and my guest today has been,
Anthony Gronowicz.
and we will resume this conversation on another day. So if you like this, show, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you for listening, and thank you, Tony, for participating.